Hey everybody, Finbar here. I hope you're having a wonderful day. You know, I've been involved in and around innovation pretty much my whole life, and there is one question I get asked time and time again when I'm describing a new disruptive innovation, something that disrupts or displaces previous categories on account of a radical improvement in value, something brand new, never been done before. So what's the question? Question is, well, if it's so good, why hasn't somebody else done it before? This happened most recently when I was describing Ion and when people finally start to see the value that Ion offers through virtual video. Why didn't Google invent this? Why didn't Amazon build this, or Apple or Meta or any of the biggest technology companies on the planet? How come a small Australian company can do this? Now, when I get asked this, I always politely respond by saying, sometimes the best innovations come from the most unexpected places. You see, the biggest breakthroughs in human history, the ones that changed everything, almost never came from inside the problem. They came from people who were looking sideways, people who hadn't been told what was impossible, people who hadn't inherited previously held assumptions. So, the stories I'm about to tell you prove this point. They're real, they're documented, and they're all remarkable. All showcase that sometimes the best innovations come from the most unexpected places. So let's get into story number one. How a $3 toy beat a $100 million problem. So the year is 2006. American soldiers are dying in Iraq, not in firefights, but from hidden explosive devices tripped by tripwires so thin they were almost impossible to see, strung across doorways in buildings that had to be cleared room by room. Step through without seeing one, and you don't get a second chance. Now, the US military had thrown hundreds of millions of dollars at the problem. Robotics, sensors, advanced optics. The best defense engineers in the world. Yet, nothing worked reliable enough. Soldiers were still dying. The answer, though, had already existed for 13 years. You see, in 1993, Sergeant First Class David Chandler, chief instructor at the US Army Sappers Leaders Course, had been at his daughter's birthday party the night before a training exercise. He watched children spray silly string across the room, and something clicked. The foam was light enough to travel 15 feet through the air, light enough to drape over a wire without triggering what lay beneath, bright enough to make the invisible visible. He brought a can to training the next morning, and you know what? It worked. The technique filtered quietly through specialist combat engineer units, but never became a standard issue. Why? Because the military had moved on to more sophisticated solutions. Then, in Ramadi, 2006, Army Specialist Todd Shriver, a 28-year-old combat engineer, called his mother, Marcel, an office manager from New Jersey, and he told her about it. The problem wasn't the idea, it was the supply. Silly string couldn't be shipped privately to Iraq, and it wasn't stocked through official channels. But Marcel didn't wait for the military to figure that out. She went to a church, then she went to the media, to the TV and the newspaper interviews across the country. She eventually shipped over 80,000 cans to soldiers in Iraq through Air Force bases, Army depots, and anyone else who would help move an aerosol can across a war zone. The cost per can, $3. The engineers never thought of it. Not because they weren't brilliant, but because brilliance trained to seek sophisticated solutions. They trained them to stop seeing simple ones. Chandler saw it because he just spent an evening watching children play. So the answer to a $100 million problem was sitting on a party store shelf the whole time. Story 2, the planes that never came home. Now, in World War II, the Allies are losing bombers over Europe at a devastating rate. Command needs to know where to reinforce the aircraft. But armor adds weight, and weight reduces range. Every decision is life or death. So they did what institutions do. They gathered data. Every returning bomber was examined, bullet holes mapped. A pattern emerged, damage concentrated on the wings, the fuselage, the tail. The conclusion seemed pretty obvious, right? Reinforce those areas. Then Abraham Wald looked at the same data. Wald was a Hungarian-born mathematician, a Jewish refugee who had fled Nazi persecution and was now working for the statistical research group at Columbia University. He saw something nobody else in the room noticed. The planes you're examining aren't the ones that made it back. The bullet holes don't show you where the planes are vulnerable, they show you where a plane can be hit and still fly home. So the aircraft that took rounds to the engine, the cockpit and the fuel system, they never returned. They're not in your data. They never could be. The answer: reinforce where there are no bullet holes. That's where the fatal shots were landing. Every analyst in that room was studying the data they had. Walter was thinking about the data they didn't have. He gave that mistake a name: survivorship bias, the invisible distortion that occurs whenever we draw conclusions only from the cases that made it through. It just didn't save aircraft, it changed how we analyze everything from business strategy to medical research to why we think success is more common than it really is. The most dangerous data is the data that never shows up. Story 3, the invention drawn in the sand. A graduate student walks into the Drexel Institute of Technology in Philadelphia and overhears a conversation that will change commerce forever. A local supermarket chain has a problem. Every product in the store has to be labeled by hand, every sale recorded manually. They want a better way. Nobody has one. Bernard Silver tells his friend Norman Joseph Woodland about it. Now, Woodland is a World War II veteran, a former Manhattan Project researcher, and a man who, once a problem gets into his head, cannot let it go. One day he's sitting on the beach, turning the problem over and over in his head, when his hand moves almost without thinking. Now, he'd been a Boy Scout, he knew Morse code, dots and dashes, he used it in the army. He pressed his 4 fingers into the sand and dragged them slowly towards him. 4 lines, thin and thick, no dots and dashes, but the same idea, now made visual. Woodland said to Silver, "What I'm going to tell you sounds like a fairy tale," but it wasn't a fairy tale. Woodland and Silver then filed their patent in 1949, but the world wasn't ready. It would take another 25 years, better lasers, faster computers, a retail industry finally desperate enough before the idea could become real. Then, on June 26, 1974, at a Marsh outlet in Troy, Ohio, a cashier named Sharon Buchanan dragged a pack of Wrigley's Juicy Fruit across a scanner. The machine beeped, the price appeared, the age of the barcode had begun. 5 billion barcodes are scanned every single day across 150 countries on virtually every product ever made. It started with a Boy Scout's memory, 4 fingers, and a patch of Florida sand. And lastly, the ice cream that exposed a car defect. General Motors received a letter from a customer claiming his brand new Pontiac wouldn't start whenever he bought vanilla ice cream. Any other flavor, chocolate, strawberry, mint, chip, the car started fine. Only vanilla caused the engine to fail. The Pontiac division president was skeptical, but he sent an engineer anyway. 4 nights in a row, the engineer rode with a customer to the ice cream parlor and watched. Chocolate, car started. Strawberry, car started. Vanilla, dead. He checked the fuel lines, the electric systems, temperature sensors, nothing. Then he stopped looking at the car and he started looking at the shop. Vanilla was the most popular flavor, pre-scooped, sitting at the front counter, in and out in 2 minutes. Every other flavor was made to order in the back, 5 minutes minimum. The vanilla trips were short. Every other trip was long. Now, when a hot engine sits idle for just 2 minutes, a vapor lock forms in the fuel line. Fuel vaporizes before it reaches the engine. 5 minutes, the engine cools down enough to prevent it. The defect had existed in thousands of cars, yet nobody had ever isolated, because no one's routine had ever exposed the exact 2-minute window with such perfect nightly consistency. A simple redesign of the fuel line, venting, eliminated it entirely. Now, the customer didn't understand engineering, he just described precisely what he observed, no matter how absurd it sounded. Vanilla didn't break the car, vanilla revealed the break that was always there. Again, the most valuable problem reports are often the ones that get laughed at first. And so, in conclusion, silly string, survivorship bias, Morse code drawn in the sand, vanilla ice cream. 4 stories, 4 completely different contexts, 4 completely different eras. 1 pattern. The breakthrough came from someone who hadn't inherited the assumption. Todd Schreiber hadn't been trained to solve problems expensively. Abraham Wald hadn't been told which data mattered. Norman Woodland hadn't been told what industry was supposed to be solving for. And one persistent customer hadn't been told his complaint was impossible. Now, the video industry had assumed for decades that video was a file. You stole the file, you deliver the file, you store the file, you deliver the file, you play the file. The entire infrastructure of streaming, Netflix, YouTube, every broadcaster on earth was built on that assumption. Nobody questioned it because inside the industry, it wasn't a question. It was just the truth. But Ion asked a different question. What if video isn't a file at all? What if it's a set of instructions, a structure that can be separated from its content so that any experience, any personalization, any combination of moments can be assembled dynamically in real time without re-rendering anything? We filed the first patents on that idea in 2010. Google didn't build this, Amazon didn't build this, not because they couldn't, but because they already knew what video was. ION was founded by people who hadn't decided that yet. That is not a story about a small company punching above its weight. That is the oldest story in innovation. So there you go. That's my 4 little stories for today. I hope it's been informative and fun. And I hope it's helped you understand that sometimes the best innovations come from the most unexpected places.